Hello, my name's Alison Irons. I am a diabetes dietitian and I work at the Churchill Hospital in Oxford. You don't need to follow a special diet if you have gestational diabetes. Having a healthy, balanced diet is important as recommended for all pregnant women. However, you may need to make some changes to the amounts of certain types of foods that you eat. The main changes that you may need to make are making some reductions to the foods that raise your blood glucose levels. Those foods are called carbohydrates. Let's look at these food models to see which foods contain carbohydrates and will raise blood glucose levels and which foods don't contain any carbohydrates and so won't raise blood glucose levels. I'm going to make two piles, one for foods that contain carbohydrate and one pile for foods that don't contain any carbohydrate. There are two main types of carbohydrates, starchy carbs and sugary carbs. So I'm going to start by moving all the starchy carbs into the pile for foods that will raise blood glucose. Starchy carbohydrates include all types of bread. So I've got brown bread, white bread, I've got a bread roll, I've got any kind of cereal or oats, pasta, rice, anything made with flour. So the base on this pizza would be a starchy carbohydrate and be in this pile. I've also got some crackers and I have a potato, so anything made with potato would also be a starchy carbohydrate. Now we've got all of the starchy carbs in the pile for foods that raise blood glucose, I'm going to move on and look at the sugary carbs. And I'm going to start by looking at fruit. So all fruit has a natural sugar in it, it's called fructose. So I'm going to move all of the fruit into this pile. So milk also contains a natural sugar called lactose, so I'm going to move the milk and the yogurt into the carbohydrate pile. So some food has sugar added to it. So for those foods, I've got a cheesecake here, but that could represent all types of cake or pudding. I have a chocolate chip cookie and a donut. So I'm now going to look at the foods that don't contain any carbohydrates and so will have little or no effect on blood glucose levels. And these foods are either proteins or fats. So I'm going to start by looking at the protein foods. So I've got some chicken, some tuna fish, a piece of white fish, an egg. I've got a beef burger there or any type of meat. I've got some nuts. And I've got some cheese. So now we've got all our protein foods in the pile for foods that don't raise blood glucose. So I'm going to look at fats. So some foods are just fat, and I've got two examples of those here. So I've got some butter, or that could be margarine, any type of fat spread, and I've got some oil. Okay, so what I've got left is some salad and some vegetables. And we know that vegetables have very little carbohydrate in them, so won't have an impact on blood glucose levels. So I'm going to move all of my salad and vegetables into the pile for foods that won't raise blood glucose. We've now separated the foods into two groups. So in this pile we have foods that contain carbohydrate and will affect blood glucose levels, and those were our starchy foods or our foods with sugars in them. And on this side, we've got our foods that won't affect blood glucose, and those were our proteins, our fats, and most vegetables. So now we're going to think a little bit more about carbohydrates. The type of carbohydrates that you eat can be important because we know that some carbs are absorbed more slowly than others and have less of an impact on blood glucose levels. Those carbs are called low glycemic index or low GI carbs. So it's also important to choose nutritious carbohydrates, and those would include whole grain, cereals or starchy foods, beans and pulses, some milk, fruit and vegetables. The amount of carbohydrates that you eat is important because it has a direct impact on your blood glucose levels. If you want to manage your blood glucose levels, a good place to start would be to cut back or reduce the sugary carbohydrates that you have. And if your blood glucose levels remain above target, you may then need to make some reductions to your starchy carbohydrate portions. So it's not a good idea to cut out carbohydrate completely because carbohydrate foods are our body's main energy source. And as we can see from our food models, a lot of the carbohydrate foods contain vitamins, minerals and important nutrients to keep you and your baby healthy. So if you want to know more information about diet and carbohydrates, there's more information on the online programme.